In this video, we will briefly examine the two views in our sample application, registration and database error. Both are PHP pages. We will begin with the error view. You will remember that the model view control design pattern separates the elements of the application by purpose. The purpose of any view is to be delivered to the browser in order to allow the site visitor to interact with the site or be informed of the result of an action. One of the mistakes that we can make is to send too much information back to the browser. For example, if we look at the database.php page in the support folder, you will see that in the catch block we capture the exception, if one is thrown, in a variable $e. Then we use the exception object's method of getMessage to retrieve the exception message from the server. We could display that message in the view, which we will do for illustration purposes. I will deliberately cause an exception to be thrown, and we can see the exception message. As you can see on the screen, the message is displayed. Why, you might ask, is this too much information? The answer is twofold. One, most non-programmers would not understand what they are looking at. And two, the username and server name are displayed, and the fact that a password exists gives too much information away to a potential hacker. See? Too much information. Instead, we will just display a generic message that tells the site visitor that a problem occurred and leave it at that. Next, let's turn our attention to the registration view. A quick look at the controller shows us that the registration view is the default view that will be delivered to the browser within the application. If we look at it in the browser, it looks like any typical registration form, with labels and inputs for names, email, and password. Typically, you would see two password fields, but I am intentionally keeping things simple. Now let's look at the code for the page, specifically looking at the form. All opening form tags need two required attributes. First, method, and second, action. Order does not matter. The method indicates how the data will be sent to the destination for processing, and the typical method is post. The reasons are, first, no limit to the amount of data that can be sent, and two, data is transferred behind the scenes. The other option is get, but is seldom used in forms. The action indicates where the data is being sent to. Using a strict MVC approach, this means that the data is always sent to the controller, typically index.php. Notice that each input in the form has a name attribute. The value will be supplied by the person who types her or his information into the input field. Why is this important? All data that is sent from the browser to the server is passed in name-value pairs. The name attribute in the input is the name part, and the person's typed information is the value. This is very important to remember when processing the data in the controller. You will also notice that each input has an ID. Please look and see that the label that precedes each input has a for attribute. The label's for attribute and the input's ID attribute have the same values. This use of the same value ties the label and the input together. The browser now understands that these two are associated with one another. Finally, notice that each of the inputs has a required attribute. This indicates to browsers that understand and support native HTML5 validation that the form cannot be submitted without data of the proper type as indicated by the input's type attribute being entered. In the next movie, we will register a user using the registration view, the controller, and model.